Awareness, the final frontier. These are the explorations of Jonathan Robinson and Brian Tom O'Connor. Their continuing mission, to discover fresh new paths to the mystery within, to seek out new joys and new methods of awakening, to boldly go into the heart of expanded consciousness. This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome, fellow explorers, to another podcast of Awareness Explorers. And we're recording this soon after the Christmas holiday, and I managed to survive the cultural craziness. How'd you do, Brian?
I also survived. Actually, I had quite a good time out in the country visiting my sainted mother and the rest of the family. That's nice. It's nice to always turn our holidays into a bit of holy days, which I assume was the original purpose behind it. And now we have New Year's coming up, and it's made me think about, things like New Year's resolutions and all that stuff. And that made me think about the power of decision, or making a decision, and the power of will to wake ourselves up. And we think that will can get us to stop smoking or be a nicer person. Can we use our will or our decision to become more awake? And if so, how do we do that? So that's the topic I'd like to explore, not just in an intellectual way, but maybe even some practical stories and methods where we can use the power of our will to become more awake. But before we go into all of that, I'd like to hear your initial impressions of what this topic brings up for you, Brian. Well, there's actually a controversy in non-dual circles about whether one can actually do anything to wake up, or whether it's actually grace that wakes them up and there's nothing to be done. And my actual view is that you can actually knock on the door by shifting your attention to awareness. But it is the vast eternity of oneness itself, which is awareness, or what I believe people are referring to when they speak about grace, that actually opens the door and draws you in. But it is more receptive to people who are looking for it, who are actually knocking on the door.
I would agree with that. And there's a lot of research and just anecdotal information that would back that up, that obviously we can decide to use a technique or decide to meditate and knock on the door, but we probably can't just say, okay, I'm deciding to wake up. If we could, you and I would be there already, and we would not be doing this podcast. We'd be just blessing people. But, anecdotally, the way grace seems to work is that sometimes you're not even knocking on the door. It can just say, hey, you there, boom, I'm going to wake you up. Kind of like what what Grace did with Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie. They weren't particularly spiritual people, yet they both woke up like in an instant. So grace can do whatever grace wants. But for the rest of us who are not subject to that level of help, the question is, can we do something that helps us be in the ballpark, or helps us to at least move further down the road? And what are the ways that might help that, and the things that can get in the way? Because I know some people who take great pride in, I decided to wake up, and to me it looks like they didn't do that very successfully. It looks like they decided to become an asshole, and they managed to do that pretty successfully, or pretty arrogant. But deciding to wake up is a whole other thing than deciding to come off as a spiritual person.
Yes, deciding to come off as a spiritual person is just another form of ego. It's another form of the story about yourself. So you're basically shifting from one type of story about yourself, a regular person, to another type of story about yourself, a spiritual person. And it's all the same story, and it's not the real you. The real you is what's aware of that story. It's the background of awareness in which everything appears, and indeed is actually connected to the background of awareness in all of us. It's all one thing. It's not an individual thing.
Yeah, yeah. Now, the opposite side of this thing called deciding to wake up or will is the common thought in many non-dual circles is there's nothing you can do. And I think that that is really a misinterpretation of what some teachers say. You know, like Adyashanti or Eckhart Tolle will sometimes say there's nothing to do. But that doesn't mean you should open up a beer and watch TV. So I look at it as when you're close to the door of awakening, you can't jump into enlightenment. That's not something you can do. But most of us aren't in that position, including me most of the time. So the nothing you can do is really only for that last quarter inch. Before getting to that last quarter inch, there's a lot you can do. You can meditate, you can do mindfulness, you can be determined to be more present. You can use one of the tools that we talk about in Awareness Explorers. And if you have the thought that there's nothing you can do, you often will end up just using that as an excuse to not do all the things that might move you forward.
That's true, but this does raise a lot of really interesting questions. Questions about free will, questions about what is the nature of awakening itself, and who awakens. Is it actually you, the body-mind, or you, the ego, or the personality that awakens, or is it awareness itself, the universal consciousness that awakens to itself? In other words, is it having a dream of being a person in the world with an individual mind and body, and does it awaken to its true nature? And the other issue that I want to talk about, because you mentioned Eckhart Tolle and Byron Katie, that many people have awoken through some sort of a crisis. They have some sort of a, what people might call a dark night of the soul, where they are extremely depressed or extremely anxious or having a very extreme emotional experience, and that this can actually trigger an awakening. And the reason that it triggers an awakening often is that the person who is having the experience can all of a sudden see that experience as separate from themselves. In other words, for instance, in the case of Eckhart Tolle, when he said, I can't live with myself any longer, and then all of a sudden it occurred to him, who is the I that can't live with me? And so he realized that maybe there are two. Maybe there is the I that is the personality and the I that is pure awareness. And then he had this little shift in identity, which we talked about in a previous episode. But I don't think that that's the only way. In other words, if that was the only way, we'd just have to all sit around and hope that we're going to get suicidally depressed so that we can awaken. And that clearly is not the case. You can actually clearly point your attention to that in which all experience appears. And that's sort of like playing in traffic. Awakening can happen when you really familiarize yourself with that pure awareness. And then a shift can happen where you identify with pure awareness as opposed to the story of you.
Yeah, yeah. But it is a little tricky because you want to make an effort, but if you put too much effort, you're just putting a lot of weight into ego and personality, which is what you're ultimately trying to let go of. So it's a certain type of effort that it's good to have some effort, or you're not doing anything. But if you put too much effort in, then you're just reinforcing the thing that you're trying to let go of. So it is tricky.
Yes, that's exactly right. It is tricky. No effort, and that's not really going to do anything. But it is effortlessness that you're trying to experience, that you're hoping, and this is, of course, paradoxical, trying to experience effortlessness. Isn't that an effort? And the way I think of it is because effortlessness is a relinquishing of the trying of the ego personality, that when you relinquish that effort, you're actually softening the hold that the ego has. And so what I would say is, yes, a little bit of effort is required. And what it is the least amount of effort possible to focus your attention on awareness itself instead of the content of awareness.
Yeah, I think that's one type of effort that's useful, but I want to talk about another type of effort,
okay,
which I'll call getting determined or resolute or sincere about waking up. You know, when I listen to a lot of teachers, they often say something like the most important thing is your level of sincerity. So the question becomes, can you do anything about that? And I think you can. So one of the reasons why these people like Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie who are suicidal wake up is that they reach a level of desperation or sincerity, which is like 100%. And I think 100% sincerity leads to an opening of grace. That's just my thought. Now, whether it does or not, I don't know, but certainly being more sincere is helpful on the path. And from that sincerity deep within ourselves, we can say, okay, I'm sick and tired of running around trying to solve all individual problems and identifying with this ego. I really want to wake up. And to the extent that you have that sincerity throughout your day, I think it's incredibly useful for becoming aware of awareness and moving forward. What do you think?
Yes, it is. But again, it's a paradox because you want to be sincere and you want to have a sincere desire, a very strong desire to wake up. But there are many reports of people who have had a really strong desire to wake up and have not. People who have said heartfelt prayers to whatever they believe in to wake up to their true nature and haven't. And then at the same time, there are many reports of people who have been doing this for a long time, who have been sincerely trying, sincerely meditating, failing, and then giving up. And then all of a sudden, in the act of giving up, boom, they woke up to their true nature. But I think perhaps both are necessary. In other words, you can't just say, okay, I give up, unless you've actually really, really, really tried and failed. Because without that really, really trying and failing and then giving up, it lacks the strong emotional counterpoint that actually, I believe, fuels the awakening.
Yeah, you bring up really what's become, if you read a lot of stories, a very common story. Somebody, you know, like Adyashanti meditated 10 hours a day for 10 years, and then he gave up, and then boom. So it looks to them, once they wake up, like, well, that wasn't that necessary because it's only when I gave up that something happened. But I do agree with you that it has to be a deep surrender. It can't be like, yeah, I'm just going to give up.
Yes, the paradox of surrender is, okay, I am now going to surrender. Well, it's so easy for that I am going to now surrender idea to be just another activity that the ego is doing. And a lot of people define waking up as a waking from the ego.
Yeah.
And that the ego actually isn't what wakes up. And the ego isn't actually what does the waking up. However, the desire is actually an ego function. The desire to meditate is an ego function. So I think the ego starts it, and at one point, grace takes over. And in some ways, we're calling it grace today, but it could mean the universe. It could mean pure awareness. It could mean universal consciousness. But just...
Or God forbid, it could mean God.
Yes. And in fact, that's what I think is referred to by God, at least in the mystical point of view, as opposed to the dogmatic or religious or rule-bound point of view. But what I was going to say is, it is that energy of grace that's actually reaching out to you through your pain, through your suffering, drawing you to it, attracting you to it, so that when you become attracted to it and you turn your attention around, that little half step to the background, to the pure ground of being, you're being drawn by grace, and you are being in a kind of a fertile ground for awakening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What I want to look at is this idea of sincerity and a decision in a mini way, not like I'm going to wake up, but I'm even going to use a technique. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to be sincere. I'm going to be in touch with my deeper heart that really wants to wake up. And that's something that ultimately we can try to decide 50 times a day. And I think it's useful for people to have some kind of way of quickly getting in touch with, okay, I'm really going to be mindful now, or use this technique now. And that's not talked about enough. But that's where most of our life is living, is when we're walking to the car, can I be more aware? When I'm eating, can I be more aware? When I'm talking to my friend? And how do we get in touch with that deep desire to not get lost in all our conditioning and instead relax into beingness? And for me, there's a couple things that I've found helpful, and I'll be interested in finding out what's been helpful for you. But there's this book I'm reading now called The 5-Second Rule. And it's kind of a stupid, silly technique, which I'll describe now, which is basically, if you're trying to take the high road in any decision, do I use a tool now to wake up, or do I watch TV? The author suggests that you count down from 5 to 0, like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you immediately act on the higher decision. And it kind of interrupts your normal conditioning, and it propels you into action. So sometimes I'll do that. I'll say, okay, I don't want to get out of bed and meditate. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, launch. And I get out of bed and I get in the meditation position.
Does it ever happen that after you count from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that the decision is, no, I think I'll roll over and stay in bed?
It has happened. I didn't want to admit that, but yeah, it has. But most of the time it's successful. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like I'm using my decision muscle to go from a pretty low state of consciousness to something a little bit higher. You can't go all the way to awakening. That involves grace, but you can go from worrying and caught up in stuff to more present by making a decision. And that's a little ritual I use. And another ritual I use is I just get in touch with something that helps inspire me. It might be reading a Rumi poem or listening to a song that inspires me. There's a wonderful video on YouTube that I sent to you, Brian, of Hugh Jackman singing this song From Now On, from the movie The Greatest Showman. It's gotten like 22 million views. You can type in to YouTube The Greatest Showman From Now On, and it'll show up. And he's singing about how he wants to change and how life is going to be different now. And getting little tidbits of inspiration like that, I know has been useful for me in making these mini decisions throughout the day to not hurry, not worry, and instead try to be present. And I'm wondering if you have similar rituals like that.
I do have similar rituals, but first I want to say that, yes, I do think you can cultivate the sincere desire to awaken within yourself. And the other thing I wanted to say, though, is that the danger of a lot of inspiring things, and I also found that Hugh Jackman song inspiring. It was especially the version where he's in the studio and I forget what it is. He has laryngitis or something and he's ill and his doctor told him he shouldn't sing, but he can't help himself and he just starts to sing.
Yeah.
I thought that was wonderful. But I guess the danger here is in thinking that what you're inspired to do is fix yourself, is fix your personality, is to improve your skills in the world, which I believe has a place, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but I don't think it has anything to do with real happiness or real awakening, which is apart from the personality, which is involved in totally being absolutely okay with the way everything is right now, including your personality, which includes all of its faults and flaws and strengths, and the way the world is right now. Because when you can drop your demands on yourself and the world, then you can actually start to turn to where happiness really lies, which is in the ground of being, which is in the universal consciousness of everything. So I think having little reminders and tips to do that is good. I have several, like for instance, I live in New York City where everything is either in an apartment building or an office building. And so I have this little trick. Every time I'm walking down a long hallway, I imagine that the hallway is actually moving through awareness as opposed to me moving through the hallway. And that triggers that little shift of attention. And I think all of the techniques that you mentioned are really good if that's what they're doing, is if they're actually turning your attention from how am I doing, how is the world doing, what is in my awareness, to pure awareness itself.
Yeah, you make such an important point, because being determined and making decisions usually is something we think about in terms of trying to change some behavior or something about our psychology. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the decision or determination to become more present, whether just being more mindful, which is a step in the right direction, or turning your attention to the background of awareness. They're different goals, and they lead to different results. But I think the basic tool of sincerity, whether you're trying to change something about yourself or you're trying to become more present and aware, really helps with both those things. They just are different results at the end.
That's a really good point, and I sincerely believe that you're right. Sincerity does help.
Well, you're so smart.
Well, thank you, if I do say so myself.
Especially when you agree with me. Your intelligence quotient goes way up.
I noticed that, so I've been trying to cultivate that intelligence by agreeing with you. But that's not always the case. Every once in a while, I don't agree, because as you know, I'm kind of a purist. As you pointed out, I really do firmly believe, and this is only from experience, not through some idea that other people wrote, although they've certainly been inspirational and influential, but just from my experience, happiness is not in the events or the things or the perceptions of our experience, but is in the pure awareness in which all experience lies. And in fact, that pure awareness, I think, is actually connected to everybody's pure awareness. It's identical in everybody because it has no qualities, and it may actually be one universal awareness. And when we talk about will and using our will to do things, there's a controversy about free will. And actually, in Rick Weinman's book, Awakening Through the Veils, he actually says that there is free will, but it's not the human personality, body, mind that has free will. It's actually universal consciousness, which he calls divinity, that has the free will, and it acts through the individual.
So in a certain way, we're not creating our own determination to wake up. We're letting go of our resistance to divinity working through us.
Beautifully put. Yes.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. You know, I like to use the metaphor, since we talked about metaphors in our last session, of that we have decision-making muscles or will muscles. And most of our decision-making muscles are flabby because we often go with the path of least resistance. But as you learn to, say, get out of bed to meditate or to exercise or to use a tool to become more present, those muscles become stronger and can therefore accomplish more. And if that muscle is used in the direction of trying to let go of our ego and be being, then that muscle is actually working in a helpful direction for awakening. So what I'd like to do, unless you have something else you want to comment on, is help our listeners to develop their decision-making muscle, their sincere desire muscle for awakening, not in general, but for today, because there is no future. There's just today. There's just now. And if we can tap into that deep determination and use it to become more present, I think that will have been a good accomplishment.
Well, I'd love to hear it. I'm looking forward to it and looking forward to playing along with it.
Good. So as usual, when we do these little guided meditations, make yourself comfortable. If you can close your eyes, feel free to do so. If you're driving, please don't do that. And take a couple of slow, deep breaths. And when you're ready, imagine that you can breathe through your heart. So you're more focused in your chest and heart area than your head area. And as you breathe into your heart area, I want you to remember a time when you felt really determined. What you felt determined to do could have been determined to lose weight or get a job or do a certain exercise or whatever. It doesn't matter. But just remember a specific time that you felt really determined in your life. Remember when that was and maybe where you were. But most important, remember what it felt like to feel really determined, like this is really important. And notice how it feels to feel that determination. And if you can, breathe into it and really feel like I am resolute about becoming more present and more aware today. Feel your hopes and dreams of waking up to your divinity and your beingness as awareness. And perhaps you can remember times that you have felt that. And feel that longing for being back in that place, both now and for the rest of the day. Breathe in that feeling of, I am determined, I am deciding to be as present and as aware as possible right now and for the rest of the day. It's just a decision to let go of identifying with all the ego stuff and instead relax into beingness. Relax into total presence and awareness. And when you fall off that and get lost in thoughts or whatever, to not have a debate in your head, to just once again immediately decide 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now, letting go into now, into beingness. And feeling that deep longing within your heart and determination to keep coming back to that place where you are present, you are aware, you are free. And as you imagine yourself going about your day today, imagine deciding in little moments like walking around or eating your food that I am going to decide to be present and aware. And gradually take your time, keeping this focus on presence and awareness. If your eyes were closed, you can decide to slowly open them while maintaining this longing, this decision to let go into beingness as best you can. And gradually come back to the room that you're in, maintaining this decision to be fully awake. Welcome back. How was that for you?
It was like an invitation to experience beingness.
Yeah.
It was like a strengthening of the resolve to experience true nature.
Right. And that's definitely one of the ingredients, not the only ingredient, but one of the ingredients of waking up.
Yes, this amazingly paradoxical subject of waking up. It's, for example, it reminded me of the popular expression, let go and let God.
Mm-hmm.
You have to decide to let go.
Yeah. Yeah, quite true. And one of the things that's useful about this decision muscle is that there's 1,000 moments per day where we can decide.
Yes.
And repoint us in the right general direction.
Repoint us. Yes, that's exactly right. You can repoint yourself many, many, many times throughout the day. And you can repoint yourself during long periods of meditation, and then remember that throughout the day, and you can repoint yourself during short periods. But where are you repointing yourself to? That's the key question. Is it to something that you are perceiving, or is it to the perceiving itself?
Yep. And that's your decision as well.
Yes, that's right. Again, the paradox of you make the decision to have no decision.
Yes, yes. Well, may our listeners decide to use the decision tool in ways that are an exploration. What part of it works for you? What might just be an ego thing? How can you use it to let go more into your true nature? And I think for everybody, that is an exploration, because we're all at different places on the path. Different things work for us. So use the countdown tool or the decision tool or whatever you want to call it. But definitely decide to join us next time in Awareness Explorers, and tell your friends and family if you're getting value from this, then please review us, tell people, shout it out to the world. That will help with your decision muscles as well. And till next time, keep exploring.
Keep exploring. Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or your favorite podcast app. And we'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.